To Palo Altans for sensible zoning, and to the Palo Alto neighborhoods, as well as to Mid-Penn Media for sponsoring this most important event. I will let the panelists speak to the topic, but now I would like to welcome some of our elected officials and to greet them as well. We have Council Member Tom Du Bois of Palo Alto here. We also have Mayor Rowena Turner of Monte Sereno. Thank you for being here. Council Member Anita Elander from Los Altos. We also have our own Mayor Eric Filsef, Palo Alto. We also have Mayor Bill Brand, all the way from Redondo Beach with us today.
Oh, you got the biggest surprise.
That's cute. We have Vice Mayor Liang Chow from Cupertino. We have Planning Commissioner Kitty Moore from Cupertino. Library Commissioner Rahul Van Sant from Cupertino. We also have Library Commissioner Leanna Crabtree from Cupertino. Thank you for your support. We also have a couple of former council members. We have former Vice Mayor Jack Morton with us today, as well as former Mayor Pat Bird with us here today. So thank you for joining us here. Quickly, briefly, I'd like to kind of give a brief intro to our panelists. We have today with us Susan Kirsch, who started Livable California as a continuation of years of community organizing for the purpose of educating, networking, and activating others to promote transparent, representative government that serves the majority of people with the broadest common good. Her activism began, as activism often does, with organizing her own neighborhood association. In 2007, Susan founded a citywide group called Friends of Mill Valley when development plans for Miller Avenue stirred community turmoil. Our second panelist is Dennis Richards, and he has spent over 20 years participating and contributing to his San Francisco neighborhood and the broader San Francisco community. With focuses in land use and human services, he has been actively involved in historic preservation, housing preservation and creation, formula retail, city long-range planning, and also has worked with the homeless and HIV/AIDS care. Dennis is currently serving as a planning commissioner on San Francisco's 7-member planning commission, which oversees the San Francisco Planning Department and has specific responsibility for the stewardship and maintenance of San Francisco's general plan. Our last panelist here is our very own Doria Sumo, who currently serves as Palo Alto's Planning and Transportation Commissioner, appointed to the position in 2016. The commission is tasked with preparing and making recommendations to the City Council on the city's comprehensive plan regarding development, public facilities, and transportation in Palo Alto. Prior to becoming a commissioner, Doria served on several citizen and board advisory committees. And now that I'm finished giving tribute to our panelists, I will pass it down to them.
Well, thank you, Lydia. Thank you. Everybody who organized this. Let's see, am I okay with this microphone?
You have to hold it up.
Okay, is this? Oh, I need to hold it? I think so. Oh, okay. I can hold this and talk at the same time. I am just so pleased to see so many people come out for something that's related to our political process and our political systems. We've got so much work to do. If you look at the slide, and the name of this session is, do you know what Sacramento is planning for your neighborhood? And as much as you might think that image is a joke, that image is not a joke. And as Dennis and Daria will talk about a little later, they will be explaining how in Senate Bill 50, that image is what Scott Wiener is proposing in Senate Bill 50. So next slide. So we know that frequently there's miscommunication or that we don't have shared values. So here's developers looking at what might be beautiful pieces of land, going, this would be a great place to put a huge city. Sierra Club, many of us would probably go, we're not so fast, but that is the way in which conflict develops, and we've got work to do to decide which priorities hold sway in terms of the legislative process. So I'm going to spend, next slide, just a couple of minutes giving an overview of livable California, as I was asked to do, in terms of how we are looking to harness and mobilize interest from people like you in what we can do to defeat a bill like Senate Bill 50. And then we'll be looking at two different narratives, especially with the goal of saying, how do we change the narrative? You know, so I'll talk about that a little bit more, and then we'll be looking at alternative ways that we can move forward. Then skip the next slide and go on to Livable California. I started Livable California about a year ago when I saw that Scott Wiener was giving a town hall meeting at the Taraval police station, and because I'd been following some of the political kinds of things of 2018 and knew something about Senate Bill 827 that you probably had heard of, I wanted to see if anybody else who was coming to that meeting had an appetite to get it together afterwards, knowing we were getting clobbered. Individual neighborhoods and individual communities were getting clobbered by the way in which legislation was coming out year after year after year and diminishing the quality of local control that communities depend on. So I was really pleased. There were 18 people who came out on a Saturday afternoon to look at what we could do. We agreed, yes, there was a problem. We were getting clobbered. We agreed we could be so much more effective if we were working in collaboration. And it's why it is just thrilling to me to see this many people coming out on a Sunday afternoon to further what that means of people working together. And we also agreed that we all wanted to work smarter, not just harder, because so many people are already working pretty intently and we want to avoid burnout. So in a nutshell, Livable California is a coalition of elected officials. So many of the people introduced today are a part of working with us, and community leaders, neighborhood association presidents, and so on. We have representatives from most of the 9-county Bay Area who come to meetings, not that everybody comes twice a month, but we hold meetings twice a month that anybody is invited to come to. We've got strong connections with Los Angeles, pleased that Bill is here from Redondo Beach, and we're stretching also into San Diego, so we are eager to be a statewide force in objecting to the nonsense that is coming out of Sacramento. Basically looking to build bridges, and our basic philosophy is the government closest to the people serves the people best. How many people agree with that? No, show of hands, yes, okay. So, next slide. We are working to advance the role of local government to make decisions about growth and land use and infrastructure decisions, just underscoring far too often the infrastructure costs are being ignored by the legislation. So water, too bad, you're on your own for the water. Schools, too bad, you're on your own. So we need to be mindful of that. And we have in mind that we're really working with a lens towards what do people need for livable communities and livable lives, and that is not determined by the profit margins that somebody else is making. We have other ways of measuring that, and we need to be capturing that. Our primary activities are advocacy, as we're doing today, networking and education, as we're doing today. And just to say, we are also branching out with more effort going into how do we use the initiative process or ballot measure process ourselves, and how do we bring in legal means to be able to protect local control. Next slide. So we're told, we hear over and over again that what we're dealing with is a housing crisis. It's a housing crisis. Are you just sick to death of hearing it's a housing crisis? So we know there's a housing problem, but what many of us are coming to understand is the real crisis that we are facing is not housing. The real crisis is the unregulated development that's being promoted. And let me just stop a minute and explain on this. How many of you know about CASA? Okay, so most of you do. For those of you that don't, quickly, it was an 18-month process that MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, started. The big problem with it is that it had San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose sitting at a table making decisions about the future, but the 97 cities that are small, medium-sized cities, were not at the table. So just a flagrant kind of disregard and ignoring those communities that are now blamed for the housing problem, and we'll get to that in just a second. So anyway, so CASA, funded by the San Francisco Community Foundation and a number of others, created 10 pieces of legislation that are being pushed right now through the legislation, and many of these bills are replacing the authority of democratically elected officials representing constituents with profit-driven global businesses and investors who have distant stakeholders. So just to think of how we redefine the problem, knowing, yes, housing. So next slide. So here's, I'm not going to go through all of this, you'll be happy to know. These are some of the 10 bills that are coming up through the CASA Compact. At the bottom in red is Senate Bill 50, which is our focus for today. The other one that is really a dreadful bill, that if you have any time to look into this, or if you think of doing a community town hall meeting like this, think of doing it on Assembly Bill 1487, which will create another entity like MTC, which, I don't know, how many of you are fans of MTC? Okay, a few, okay, so this would be another housing version of MTC with taxing and distribution authority, raising $1.5 billion a year, and looking as if they are going to draw that money out of our community coffers, in addition to sales tax and some other kinds of things. But we not to get totally focused on just Senate Bill 50, because there's others. Next slide. I would be so happy if the success of this 2019 season is that we start making inroads to change the narrative, that we change the assumptions and the numbers and the process that media and big business and legislators are using to shove these measures down our throats. So if we look at proposed legislation, you see a list there, you know, that the process that we are having to contend with is adversarial, it is top-down mandates, it's one-size-fits-all instead of uniqueness, it's putting economics and economic measurements and profits at the top of the priority list, using sticks and threats. Our own new governor is suing Huntington Beach. It is the unelected regional bodies that are pushing much of this and is moving us towards being an autocracy. On the other hand, Livable California, and I've got our name on the top of this, but I know this is your communities and your city councils and your neighborhood groups as well, working towards collaboration. So just yesterday we had a Livable California meeting. The mayor of Burlingame was there telling us about all of the things that they've been going there. And I know Palo Alto, your own mayor, giving the State of the City address, was talking about all the things that are happening without the need for legislative top-down dictates to make housing or jobs balance happen. You know, carrots and support, really believing that the electoral process is important and that democracy is something worth fighting for and that it is being threatened, and we have to be mindful of that. Next slide. So, housing, yes, it's a problem. The fervor that we see is that it's a crisis, that it's a catastrophe, it's an emergency, a calamity. This CASA process that I described came out with their shiny, glossy report, the title of which is to say, this isn't just like a fire emergency, this is a 15-year emergency policy package to confront the housing crisis in the San Francisco Bay Area. I would guess we could take any of the people who sit on planning commissions in this room And we would be able to do something with quicker solution without calling it a crisis than what this body is. So we need to be looking at the question, why is it this long a crisis? Livable California would recommend that we look at this as any kind of immediate crisis is. It's a turning point. It's a defining moment. We get a chance to reestablish values and concepts that we want. We revisit the assumptions and the numbers. And you know, I'm not going into the detail, but if you go to our website in terms of how the narrative is beginning to change, we've got articles on there like latest data shows you can't bring prices down by building more housing. Or the researcher from UCLA, Michael Storper, who's written that blanket upzoning won't solve the affordable housing crisis and will fail. Or debunking the supply side myth or pressures to build, and MTC's CASA, the end of local land use authority, and other kinds of topics that you can find on our website. So, next slide. What do we have as the causes of the problem? The proposed legislation, 50 and all these other bills that you see written up on the handout that you got when you came in, are blaming cities. They're saying that cities aren't building enough, so they have to be punished, or there needs to be different zoning laws. You know, the truth is, the motto is cities don't build, developers do. Not only cities, they're blaming CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, to try to rein that back, and blaming zoning on the housing problem. I mean, it's preposterous in terms of the simplicity of that. Livable California, I mean, we would acknowledge that some of your cities kind of went overboard in approving commercial space and have not been mindful about getting a job housing balance, and we understand there are tax advantages that have been in place to do that, with a strong recommendation that that would be what our legislators would be looking at as a way of handling that problem instead of pushing it down into cities. You know, we firmly believe that businesses are not paying their fair share, and that there have been inadequate funds, especially when we lost redevelopment funds. So just quickly to go through to the next slide, and then we'll go through these quickly. And you might have seen the posters, next slide, the posters out in the hallway. We've got that the cause of the housing problem is really the success of Silicon Valley. If Apple were building for the people that it now employs, this is the way it would look if they were providing housing. And just to know that those towers are 40 stories tall, providing housing in 800 square foot units. So just go to the next slide is the picture of what Facebook would look like, and the next slide for what Google would look like. So this is the problem that regional agencies and legislators are trying to push out into all of the communities, rather than be mindful of how do we solve this problem, working on it as a problem, not a crisis. So next slide. The proposed legislation is to put decisions in the hands of developers, saying, you city leaders have not been up to the job. It should go to developers. So really what we have are developer benefit bills, not housing or community benefit bills. Because we know their influence then, the influence of real estate, investors' finances. The proposed legislation is based on this assumption that building more will make a difference, as if increased supply of market rate housing, which is what they're mostly wanting to build, will ever meet the demand for especially low income and affordable housing. And skip the next slide. So in conclusion, the outcomes that we face are really important outcomes, and we have a choice about this. On the one hand, as any of these, 10 bills from CASA, and overall there were 200 housing bills introduced, the proposed legislation will bring us higher density, loss of single-family homes, out-of-scale development, like you saw in that first slide. We're losing those kinds of things that in livable California, when we talk about what makes our neighborhood or our communities livable, these items in this column is what is at risk, that we lose those livability qualities, and we increase the chance of cities going bankrupt for the added expenses that they will incur. And you'll see, here's this idea too, not enough attention to the inadequacy of the infrastructure and funding for infrastructure. Livable California, I've got 4 kind of concluding statements here in terms of how we're looking to frame what we're doing and changing the narrative. Number 1 is to change the narrative from a housing crisis to a crisis in unregulated development. Number 2, to recognize that inequity and income disparities are at the root cause of this problem, the problem of affordability, and none of this is looking at getting to those root problems of inequity and income disparity. We need to strengthen, not weaken, the authority of local governments to plan for and use land use and infrastructure. We have the possibility of working more with groups like ABAG, which is a representative group, or League of California Cities, to do that kind of thing. And finally, the importance of fostering a reinvigorated citizenry that boldly stands up for democracy. So just to see this many people, hats off to the planning group that pulled this together, because this is looking like a reinvigorated citizenry, and we're just in time. So now I turn it over to
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. My name is Dennis Richards. I'm here as a private citizen. I happen to be a San Francisco Planning Commissioner, and I'm here today exercising my First Amendment rights, safe harbor statement, so everybody understands that. I guess show of hands, how many feel that Scott Wiener and politicians in Sacramento actually know what's best for you more than you? 1, okay? We have a YIMBY in the back. Got it. 2.
I mean, that's such a loaded question that,
Well,
what are you supposed to say?
Well, it's...
Does he know more than me? Maybe not, but on the other hand, I'm a
know what's best for you, not know more than you. Okay. How many feel that the quality of life in the past 5 years has gone down? Okay, near unanimity. Okay.
No, not unanimity.
Quality of life's gone down. Okay.
I think it's gone up.
Oh, great. Okay, wonderful. Unanimity -2. What's interesting is, if you get a chance, please take a look online at the San Francisco Planning Commission's last Thursday's hearing. We actually had a hearing on SB-50 to understand the impact of what it would do to San Francisco. So imagine this, in the discussion we had, our planning staff said, well, impact analyses really don't happen for Sacramento bills. And we said, well, when we put a bill together in San Francisco, we want people to understand what it means to them. And the city attorney or somebody said, well, the attorney general does that after the bill passes. And I said, that's absolutely ridiculous. So SB-50 will fundamentally change your lives. It'll fundamentally change the environment that you live in. It'll fundamentally change what say you have in your life on what your neighborhood looks like. One of the other at the Planning Commission hearing was, well, why we've had area plans in San Francisco. We had to go through a multi-year process on environmental impact reports. Well, here we have a rezoning of the entire state. Why don't we have an EIR, a bill EIR, not a plan EIR, a state EIR? And the answer was California legislators exempt themselves from CEQA. So they can pass any law they want, but it has to have no environmental review. I don't think that's fair. We have to do EIRs and environmental review when we pass land use laws, but they don't. Oh, a few other things. They exempt themselves from a lot of other items as well, one of them being the Brown Act. They can have meetings in private. We, public officials, can't. There's several other things that they exempt themselves from, and I just don't think that's fair, honestly. We have a housing issue. We have a supply problem. We have a supply of affordable housing problem. We have, like San Francisco's produced 200% of its market rate housing units, 200% in our RENA numbers. We haven't produced enough middle income housing, we're at only 18%, and low income housing, we're at about 40 to 50%. But we're way up on the market rate housing. That's the issue. We have too many dollars chasing too few properties, and it's actually pushing members of the community out. We're not building the right kind of housing. We need to build housing, absolutely, but it has to be the right kind of housing. Market rate housing, because housing is not a simple supply-demand economics 101. Housing market is stratified. When you add a luxury unit at $4 million, the person who's making $50,000 that works for the US Postal Service, it doesn't benefit him. It only benefits the people in the $4 million tranche of housing, because the more the supply actually goes up in that tranche, the price may come down, but it doesn't affect the person on the bottom of the ladder. So we have an affordable housing problem. You can ask a question later, sir, if you want to just fill out a card. I appreciate that. I don't like the word local control. I think that's a loaded word, and I think it's a word that actually makes me cringe a little bit. I like community discretion. We are a community. We should have some discretion over what it is we want our community to look like. That's pretty simple. You're going to have a report from your planning commissioner on Senate Bill 50 and its impact. One of the things I just wanted to say was, when I read Senator Wiener's introduction on the equitable communities, when he released it, one thing jumped out at me, and I've got experience here, personal experience. So he says, preservation of local control. He goes into, under this legislation, all housing projects will still be subject to EIR, environmental review, existing labor and employment standards for new construction, local development fees, community engagement process, and architectural design review for each housing development will remain as is. That sounds like, hey, I can get behind that. We still have a lot of local control. And then he goes on to anti-demolition. We're actually in San Francisco trying to put a demolition measure together, or demolition legislation together, because people are going and knocking houses down illegally that are relatively affordable to maybe 10 or 15% of the population, and supersizing them to people that actually maybe half of 1% can afford it, $5 to $7 million. Anti-demolition. A local government retains existing authority to ban, prohibit, or restrict demolition of existing housing. Here's what jumped out. Subject to the Housing Accountability Act. Well, that just takes away all local control, because if you look at the Housing Accountability Act, it basically says we cannot say no to a development where they densify, meaning add one additional unit to the project that's going to replace that building that they're going to knock down. And we've had instances in San Francisco where we've been threatened with the lawsuits on Housing Accountability Act, even if we wanted to take a bedroom away from one of the units for livability. So the fact that, yeah, it allows for local demolition, but it's subject to the Housing Accountability Act, makes it a lie. I mean, let's face it what it is. It's a lie. If Senator Wiener really was serious about the anti-demolition piece, he would say that the Housing Accountability Act doesn't apply here. So you are able to retain the existing structures that you have for whatever reason you have that actually supports your general plan. A few other things coming. We've been carpet bombed with bills from Sacramento, carpet bombed. 200 bills this year, probably over 100 last year. It's almost like they're throwing so much shit at us, we can't duck, we're getting hit with it. And I think that's not the right way to have a democracy. You should have a hearing, we should understand what it is that you're doing, and we should actually, support it or not. And to the best of my knowledge, the only hearing we've ever had in this state to date on SB-50 was in San Francisco at our planning commission. And I know our board's going to take it up, but why hasn't Scott gone around the state and held big workshops on, this is what's going to mean to you, let me show you, how do you feel about this? He's jamming it through. He jammed it through the first minute it was available at 9:01 on December 3rd, it came. I don't think that's democracy, folks, sorry. The other thing is there's some other things in the works. So in our planning commission hearing, and I hope you watched it, sfgovtv.org is where it's at, we said, wow, so in our affordability requirements in San Francisco, we don't have an affordability requirement for under 10 units. And so one of the planning commissioners who I think supports SB-50 said, well, we can go ahead and add a affordability requirement. And I said, no, you can't. One of Scott's friends, Nancy Skinner, introduced SB-330. that actually says any downzoning that you have done, either by voter initiative or passed your legislature or your city council, back to January 1, 2018, is null and void. And you can't downzone anything. You can't even have a voter initiative on your own land use. It's a multiple attack bill on everything that we've got here that we're trying to actually have any kind of a say in. So they're trying to create a haphazard planning code for the state via assault bills. You've got this bill and that bill and this bill and that bill, but no, this is subject to that, but this one disagrees with that. It's an absolute mess. So I just, one other question before I end, and I don't want to get into some specifics because you're going to get that here. Who would support a constitutional amendment saying that land use is a municipal affair, meaning it's something that the community actually should be doing? Okay, interesting show of hands. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to have questions. What's that? So the question, would you support a constitutional amendment initiative to return land use decisions to the local community versus Sacramento? Okay, thank you.
I just want to remind you, if you have questions, put it on the card and then wave it so that somebody can come and pick it up. Thank you so much. She needs somebody to help her with her slides.
Somebody has to. So, it's very nice to see you all here this afternoon. Thank you for spending a gorgeous day with us. And I just also want to make the statement that I am on the Planning Commission in Palo Alto, but I do not represent the Planning Commission. I'm acting as a citizen myself. And I also wanted to let you know that we are having a Planning Commission meeting. I'll certainly watch the San Francisco one, but we are having one at our Planning Commission next month. So what I want to do is give you an overview of what SB-50 looks like in Palo Alto. So SB-50, as we know from previous speakers, is moving through the state process as we speak really quickly. So, and some of the details are changing still. So it's not finalized, but I want to give you some of a baseline understanding of the basics of what SB-50 would look like in Palo Alto. So I need the next slide, please. So the primary goal of SB-50 is to create a system of development standards that preempt local standards to incentivize higher density housing across California by mandating a one-size-fits-all incentive approach through upzoning of certain areas. The supporters of SB-50 see it as a response to the perceived shortage of housing and think it will create housing affordability choices. Whether or not it would succeed in creating housing affordability choices is highly, highly debatable. However, what it will do is take away local control of some zoning decisions. SB-50 applies to all zones that allow housing, including low-density residential zones and commercial mixed-use zones. So it would apply to a lot of the city. There is a protection written into the zone that it does not apply to building parcels that have tenants or have had tenants in the last 7 years. We really are worried that's not going to work too well. For one thing, the city of Palo Alto doesn't keep very good data on this information. We have a lot of informal rental situations that are not documented in any way by the city, and we're worried that it would be extremely hard to enforce. Slide 3, please. So basically, they slipped one? Okay. Is this? Yeah, okay, sorry. So there are basically 3 areas that will be subject to different degrees of state-mandated upzoning under SB-50. The first one is a high-quality transit corridor, which is basically a bus route. So in Palo Alto, that's limited to VTA Route 22 along El Camino and Samtrans Route 281 along University Avenue. And it is worth noting here that the VTA has been diminishing the routes in Palo Alto at an alarming rate, and people are very concerned about the health of the VTA at all and whether it will, in a short time, not serve the North County at all. So there's also the transit-rich areas, and these are areas within half-mile or quarter-mile radius of a train stop or a ferry. So since we don't have ferries in Palo Alto, that means the 3 Caltrain stations, University Avenue, California Avenue, and San Antonio Road. So all 3 of these stations, just so you know, they include a lot of different zones, but they do include low-density residential zones, such as R1. Slide, please. So let's talk first about the jobs-rich zone. This is has the same development standards as the high-quality bus corridor, so we'll group them together. The jobs-rich zone hasn't been completely defined. However, there is language in SB-50 that has indicators of what will qualify for this designation. So the first one is proximity to jobs. I think we all know that we have an awful lot of jobs in Palo Alto. The next one is high area median income. We have a median income that is twice that of the state of California, so yep, qualify there too. We also have high quality schools. We're very proud of our schools. Most of us know that they're one of the gems of Palo Alto, with over 75% of our students testing at or above state standards. So it is very likely that most of Palo Alto will meet this definition. Interestingly enough, and like I said, this SB-50 is a moving target still. Recent revisions just this week might include, which means something for our neighbors, might include cities next to cities like Palo Alto as also being jobs-rich zones. So, so what would SB-50 do in these zones? In the jobs-rich zone, which is also the bus zone, it would maintain some of the development standards. However, it would eliminate all density limitations, meaning there's no maximum number of units that you could have in a given location, and it would mandate only 0.5, half a unit, half a parking spot per unit, regardless of the size of the unit. So the upshot of this could be that over time, there would essentially be no R1 zones left in Palo Alto. Slide, please. But it gets even worse. SB-50 also allows developers in the jobs-rich zone, also the bus zone, to choose from 3 additional waivers from development standards, and this is carried over from another bill, SB-35, that passed a couple years ago. So those local standards can include things like height, floor area ratio, which is basically the size of the building you can get in relation to the size of the parcel, setbacks, etc. So this would increase the size of buildings, reduce privacy, reduce the amount of green and open spaces in the city, and all of this still with half a parking spot per unit. Slide 6, please. So transit-rich areas. So these are the areas within a half mile or quarter mile of one of our train stations, respectively. So in a half mile radius, you can be 45 feet high, which is 3 to 4 stories. And what?
It says 45 inches.
Oh, that's probably my handiwork. Yeah, we're gonna make little houses for mice. So that's about a 2.5 floor area ratio, which is about 2.5 times greater than what is allowed in R1, just for comparison's sake. Within a quarter mile, we're also making some more mice houses at 55 feet high, which is 4 to 5 stories, and that's a 3.25 FAR, or about 8 times what would currently be allowed in an R1 zone. So both of these have absolutely no on-site parking required, no limit on the number of units, so absolutely no required parking. So, but remember those 3 waivers? They also apply in this zone, the transit-rich zone, and that's where people think you could be getting buildings as tall as 75 or 80 feet. Again, no limit on the number of units and no required parking. So next slide, please. So here's a map of Palo Alto. So what does this mean for Palo Alto? What could it look like in Palo Alto? So Palo Alto, the 4 zones are represented here. The darker orange and red zones represent the radii around the train stations, and the 2 lighter zones are that encompass the rest of Palo Alto, not the Baylands, are the bus zone and then the jobs rich. Remember, they have the same development standards. So, next slide, please. So here I just made the map a little bigger. So you can take a look at where you live and look at your neighborhood and how likely they may be to be affected. Just so to orient you, this is my neighborhood, College Terrace. This is Duvenick St. Francis, really far from commercial centers or jobs centers, Midtown. You can see that the whole town would be affected in varying degrees depending on which zone you're in. So now we have some actual locations in Palo Alto to kind of show you before and after photos and renderings of various things that could happen under SB-50. So slide, please. So many of you may know this location. It's the First Baptist Church at 305 California Avenue. That's the corner of California Avenue and Bryant Street. This is in an R1 residential zone, but this site happens to be, it's a pretty large parcel, and it's because it's a church, and it's also within a quarter mile of the California Avenue train station. And under SB-50, slide please, this is what could be developed at this site. So this is a building with 150 units, studio or 1 bedroom, absolutely no on-site parking. So, and remember, a project of this magnitude that is so different for this neighborhood would not be subject to any local control. So there are 2 exceptions I want to mention while we're looking at this slide to, besides the tenancy exception. There is an exception, parcels that would be exempted from SB-50 if there's an existing city standard that documents that there would be an adverse impact on public health or safety, which we don't even know what that means really. It doesn't really describe what that document is. I don't know that we have documents like that in the city. And the other reason, if it's an original building, is on the California Registry of Historic Places. So that's good. So let's see. The next slide please. This is a location in downtown South on Addison between Ramona and Bryant, and this is within a half mile of the downtown Caltrain station. So this is currently a neighborhood with a pattern of single-family homes on smaller lots, and this is also in the downtown South neighborhood where we have a parking permit program, like downtown North. Both of those neighborhoods are heavily impacted by parking demands from commuter workers and are heavily parked all the time. So the next slide shows one possible result of SB-50 development, and these are 2 sort of medium-sized apartment buildings, but they're on both sides of this sort of low 1-story house. And remember, because they're within half mile of a train station, absolutely no on-site parking is required, and this is in a heavily impacted area with parking problems already. Next slide, please. So this is a location in the Green Meadow neighborhood on Scripps Avenue near Ben Lomond. This isn't within a half mile. This is within the half mile of the San Antonio station, and you can see this is a predominantly low one-story single-family homes, mostly Eichlers. A lot of our Eichlers are protected actually historically. And what this rendering, the next rendering shows, is the potential from combining two lots, which we believe is in the bill. And so this is a 45-foot tall apartment building, and this would have about 55 units at maybe 45K square feet. And once again, no requirement for on-site parking. So that's that slide. And then the next location is a site on Margarita Avenue near Park Boulevard in the Ventura neighborhood. And this is currently zoned R1. This is in the jobs-rich or bus corridor zone, so it's not within a half mile of a train station, but you could still get a much larger development. And the next slide shows a 35-foot tall condo building with 8 units. In this case, because of the zone it's in, it would only, for 8 units, it would only require 4 parking spots. And remember, this is an example of some of the kind of development that could happen anywhere in Palo Alto under SB-50. So, next slide, please. So, the bottom line for me as I think about this is, it comes in the form of 2 questions. What do we want for Palo Alto? You know, as we grow and change, which we will, that's fine. Do we want to retain control of our destiny or relinquish control to state mandates? And let's be clear about SB-50. SB-50 doesn't favor residents. It favors developers and tech companies. It will not create more truly affordable housing choices and does not help our residents who have modest incomes in any way. SB-50 could potentially come at a great cost to our community. It will worsen parking and traffic problems. It will strain resources like our schools, parks, and streets. It will harm the environment, diminishing backyard habitat, sunlight, and privacy, and will likely make rents go up, not down. Finally, to the second question, do we want to retain control of our destiny or relinquish control to state mandates? Well, heck yeah, we want to retain control. In my opinion, this is an attempt by Sacramento to take away decision-making at the local level. It is a one-size-fits-all approach that just doesn't fit Palo Alto. Palo Alto and other cities around us have responded to the housing needs by making many changes to both city ordinances and our zoning code. But these changes were made with our community in mind, tailored to our community, and designed to enhance our community. And SB-50 won't even give us a chance to let that work. So SB-50 sets a horrible precedent. It is an outrageous overreach at the state level, and it will harm, not help, our Palo Alto. So please get involved. Let your voice be heard. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask Mayor Bill Brand to come and introduce his efforts.
Thank you, Lydia. And good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I've come a long way, partly just to come to this meeting, as well as some San Francisco activists and elected officials yesterday. Let me tell you a little bit about Redondo Beach real quick, and I'll just lead up to this and why I'm so happy to see this kind of effort and you guys turning out like this. Redondo Beach has the exact opposite problem you guys have here in Palo Alto, Cupertino, and generally the Silicon Valley area, in that we are very densely populated. People think that Redondo Beach is some tony little beach town. But to give some numbers to it, we're 11,000 residents per square mile. Right next to us is Hermosa Beach, which is 14,000 residents per square mile, and the most densely populated area on the entire California coast. And so we're built out. Give you an example, Long Beach is 9,000 residents per square mile. I don't know what Palo Alto is, I think it's like 6,000 residents per square mile. So when we see Sacramento coming at us, claiming that we need more residential development, I've always said we don't have a housing shortage in Redondo Beach. We have an affordability problem, housing affordability problem, which is a big difference. So we have a housing jobs imbalance that is opposite to you as well. 93% of Redondo residents who work and live in Redondo Beach leave Redondo Beach to go to work. So our population goes down. So what we need to do is bring more jobs to Redondo Beach so we can take some of that load off the traffic infrastructure going each way. So as these bills came down from Sacramento, I started paying attention a little over a year ago. Everybody got really upset about it. Spent some time in Sacramento, met with Scott Wiener. There's a lot of complexities in it all, a lot of bills coming down. It's crazy. The 15 bills that passed in 2018, 2017, taking away our local zoning authority, it's just getting worse and worse. So I met Susan, I met Dennis, I started talking with people in Northern California and realized the problem is the same in the sense that Sacramento is trying to take over our local zoning control, and they're carpet bombing us, as Dennis says. And so as we advocated against each individual bill and it just kept coming, we realized, you know what, this just isn't going to stop, and it's not going to be good for the entire state. This broad brush across California to fix the housing crisis is going to be an absolute disaster for much of the state. Unfunded mandates, wrong type of zoning, things happening that are just going to ruin our communities. So I basically zeroed in on the idea of a constitutional amendment. Because if you look at the Article 11, Section 5 of the Constitution, it really sets certain controls for charter cities, like elections, like zoning and land use, and some other things that if you are a charter city, as Palo Alto is, you have certain controls that the state can't influence or override. So they came into Huntington Beach, which is a charter city, and they sued Huntington Beach over their inability to add housing, their willingness to downzone some of the areas. And a lot of people don't realize Huntington Beach has countersued twice, claiming that we're a charter city, state can't do this to us. So one of the tacks that charter cities can watch and try to protect our local zoning and land use is those lawsuits that Huntington Beach are pursuing. The other tack, obviously, are these advocacy efforts, which I've been involved in for well over a year now, and everyone else is involved in. But the reason I'm up here, and what I'm really looking at, is a constitutional amendment to amend the Constitution through the public initiative process to make zoning and land use a municipal affair. So that's a bombshell, okay, whether you realize it or not. That is going to undermine all of Sacramento's efforts. And they're very nervous about that because they realize that. And so I think these three different approaches, where you've got the advocacy that they're working on here, you've got what Huntington Beach is going through, and you got what this other group is working on, initiative statewide, and you're going to see that coming out. Something's going to happen. They're going to build on each other. I think the initiative is really the neutron bomb for them. And I think the communities around California, once they realize what SB-50, and SB-50 is just one. I'm sitting here listening to this, and I have all these other bills in my head that piggyback on SB-50, do things worse than what SB-50 is doing. And if SB-50 doesn't work this year, guess what? They're coming back next year. So I think your state senator is Hill, and your assembly member is Berman. If you guys don't do anything tonight or anything else, you need to write them an email or call them on the phone and tell them they damn well better come out against SB-50, because it is going to ruin your town over the long haul. My senator, and I'll just leave you with this about how nasty it's getting up there, Senator Ben Allen was on the Housing Committee last year in Sacramento, And he was one of the votes that kept 827 out of committee. Well, guess what? He's not on that committee anymore. And guess what else? They formed their own committee for Scott Wiener. I call it the Wiener Committee. And it's getting out of committee this year because they've made him his own committee and they've appointed whoever he needs. So that's the way things are rolling up there. It's backed by a lot of big money, a lot of big money. This is the holy grail for many of the lobbyists, many of the consultants, the developers, the lawyers. I mean, they've been trying to get this done for a long time, and now they've got this infrastructure in Sacramento to make it happen. So it's going to be up to the communities all around California, which is why I've come up here, and they've come down there as well, to mount these efforts, these three efforts. I see it as a three-legged stool, and we've got to pursue all these channels. So it's going to take about $5.5 million to get this initiative on the ballot, because how many signatures you need is based on the last governor election. And so we need 997,000 signatures, which means we need 1.3 million to collect 1.3 million to make sure it qualifies, because some won't be good. So the fundraising effort is beginning. You'll be hearing about it, and all this other stuff is just fantastic. And thanks for letting me speak. And I got to go to the airport. So anyway,
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you, thank you. So I just want to also mention that we have Vice Mayor Greg Schmidt here today, as well as Mayor of Cupertino, Stephen Scharf, here with us, who came in a little bit. Okay, now we're going to go on to the question and answers. First question, I think this is probably a Dennis question. Are National Historic Preservation Districts exempt from SB-50?
So it's interesting. Well, I'm not going to pull this up. It's interesting because I went back and looked at all preservation-related language in all land use bills, and there's no standard. Some bills, some laws call for it having to be on the California Register or the National Register or a local landmark. Others point to CEQA, where in CEQA you have different categories of buildings that are either unknown, not historic, or identified as historic. SB-50 points to CEQA. It doesn't specifically say historic preservation is exempt from SB-50. The issue that I have with that is the Legislative Analyst's Office just came out last week with a how CEQA is impacting housing production report. How we got into this by right kind of spin cycle was the Legislative Analyst's report four or 5 years ago on how the coastal cities with local zoning is impacting production of housing. So by pointing it to CEQA, and they changed CEQA, it's not protected. So it's got to be written in there. That's one of my beefs with the bill.
Thank you. I think probably Susan, you would know this. Who are the organized forces pushing for approval of SB-50?
Well, the group that formed to create CASA are a lot of the people behind it. So it is big cities are behind it. Also behind it are the developers, the builders, the unions, the established corporations who stand to gain from it. I mean, to its credit, just recently the Los Angeles Democratic Central Committee came out opposed to Senate Bill 50. So just to get the other side of that question, if any of you can be influential with your own Democratic or Republican committees to come out against it, there's hope on that side of it.
Is SB-50 viewed favorably in the Assembly or by the governor?
I would just say, I think it's still too early to tell, and if you know politicians, they would not be coming out to say much of any a definitive answer on that. They will be waiting to hear what the amendments are that come out, and they will be playing a waiting game. It's too soon to tell.
Where will the schools be built for the children who will be living in all these new housing units? Or will all the inhabitants be childless bike riders, bus riders, and train riders? I assume this increase in population will also be non-auto owners. So where will the schools be built for the children who will be living in all these new housing units?
So I'm assuming that's a rhetorical question. I will say that that's one of the concerns that we have, and we have, Stanford University is going through its county general use permit process right now, and Stanford's growth alone has prompted experts on the school board to think that we're going to be needing more schools, that we will not, that growth alone will require us to have more schools. So that, between that and the organic growth that we're going to experience just as a community, it's, no one can answer that question.
It sounds like these efforts need a lot of money, dollars. Does Livable California need our financial support? And how do we contribute? Can we give a check today?
Oh, well, I love whoever asked that question. Thank you. There are envelopes out on the table outside that have they have a stamp on it coming back to us. There's a form there that you can fill out. Yes, I mean, to date, we've been strictly a volunteer organization, just a very small fundraising effort, and as you all know, because many of you I know are involved in similar kinds of things, it takes that combination of the heart and passion where people will work tirelessly without having a lot of money to go with that, but it also requires money for certain kinds of filings and travel and printing and all of those things. So the more we can have the financial resources to match the passionate commitment, the more we will be able to form as a statewide organization with clout to do more meetings like this and other things in collaboration with groups like the Palo Altans.
Thank you. If a city adds a new transit line, would that put nearby R1 zone, which is single-family housing neighborhoods, at risk of upzoning?
Yes. So I asked a question in the San Francisco Planning Commission. I said, is there anywhere in the world that we zone based on bus routes? And they said no. And I said, well, what's our on-time performance? Should we start now looking at whether it's really running every 15 minutes or 20 minutes, 70% of the time, or 50? Where's the threshold? And what if we change the bus route? Do we change the zoning too? It makes no sense. It's too variable. The other issue that we have is there is some monkey business going on in Los Angeles where there's political pressure. The MTA, or their version of the MTA down there, which actually runs the light rail that they've been putting. By the way, they spent, I think, $22 billion on the light rail, and what they've seen is transit ridership go down to 1985 levels. So I think that really needs to be looked at. I think the people that are buying the units near the transit are owning cars, and they're taking Uber and Lyft. So we have actually more of a congestion problem than that. So to the point, yes, it definitely will change.
Thank you. Who will pay for affordable housing when we have the highest housing prices in the country?
Can I take that? So one of the interesting things that I threw out there was Senator Wiener in SB-35 required a 50% affordable percentage, which actually starts solving the problem. And it incents builders to build these units because they are going to be smaller units, or they have to meet the state building code minimum, while you can build the big market rate units. So actually I think they're affordable by design. San Francisco did a Nexus study that says for every market rate housing unit we add to the housing stock, we need to add 0.37 BMR, below market rate unit or affordable unit, because the person who's the cashier at the Safeway, the person who does the Pete's Coffee, the demand created for the additional goods and services that the market rate person has with their buying power demands that kind of a return. So anything above, for us in San Francisco, 0.37 starts solving the problem. SB-50 requires, it was blank, he put a range of 15 to 25% in. So for San Francisco, we're actually adding, we're making the problem worse by adding more market rate housing and not adding enough affordable housing. I think if Senator Wiener had come out and said, you know, I'm going to make these changes, I'm going to make it just like SB-35 when it was 50%, I think he got a lot more people would get their mind wrapped around you're really solving the problem, not adding to it.
Doria?
Yeah, and I'll just add something about Palo Alto, is that, and the mayor touched on some of this in the State of the City speech recently, and that is that we have to raise our percentage of inclusionary zoning. We have to have inclusionary zoning include rental properties, which is now legal because of something called the Palmer Fix. We have to probably want to have a business tax that contributes to our affordable housing coffers, and we need to have a realistically high fees for new development that also is where our affordable housing funds come from.
Can I add to that?
Oh, I have one last thing, and that, sorry. I think it's time, the last big swath of undeveloped land in Palo Alto is the Stanford Research Park, which is currently zoned for commercial. I think we need to start the conversation with Stanford about rethinking that and how much of that square footage, 750,000 square feet, will need to be schools and residential.
So, yeah. So lastly, I mentioned SB 330. Senator Skinner, Senator Wiener, and Assemblyman Schuh are called the Housing Caucus. Senator Skinner introduced SB 330, and the first thing it says is it freezes fees and exactions at the rates applied as of January 1, 2018. So if you want to if this bill passes as is and you want to up your inclusionary rate to actually start solving the problem, you can't.
I'd like to add just another dimension of the question too, and that we really be clear about the difference between affordable housing and low-income housing. And to remember that affordable is always a matter of how much money we have. So we can have people where it's affordable to live in a $10 million house. That is affordable. And that the issue that we're facing goes back to that issue of income inequities that we're facing, and knowing that the low income is the population that's really vulnerable. And so just one other part of this, we rarely hear about how business should be doing more. And please look at those forms out there, the pictures that are out there, and that we need to be more creative about that. I know Zuckerberg and others got a lot of attention for coming out to say they were going to put a lot of money, what I think, $500 million. But those are loans. They're not putting that out to say they're giving that money to support it. It's a business thing. I heard they're thinking of getting 7 to 8% on that loan money. So could we all start looking at where the money is going and who's benefiting so that we get some greater balance in that?
Okay, so how big of a threat to our local parks and open space do you think CASA Compact Element 8 is that requires cities to zone underutilized land for housing?
So parkland can only be undedicated by a vote of the people. So could that happen at some point? I guess, yeah. So there is a danger there, but I guess it's not an immediate danger unless there's something in another bill that overrides that.
There is.
Okay.
There is. So Nancy Skinner says, prohibits changes to the zoning or general plan classifications that would reduce the intensity of residential development permitted, including height, density, FAR, and open space. So some folks were in San Francisco yesterday, and we drove by Dolores Park. And Dolores Park is pretty much one city block big. And it was so crowded with people, you couldn't see the grass, honestly. And I said this in the Planning Commission meeting. I said, when we add these million new residents to San Francisco, where's the parks going to come from? If we can't create parks, we're going to have to create it from additional housing. We're going to have to knock houses down and create a park. I mean, Dolores Park used to be a cemetery. We don't have any cemeteries left in San Francisco. We can't make cemetery parks now. So it's really the impact on additional development goes beyond just affordable housing or housing that people can actually live in that they can afford. It's libraries, it's transportation, it's green parks and open space. There's a whole slew of things that development actually requires, streetscape improvements, that aren't being funded. And with SB 330, we can't go back and ask for impact fees to do those. We can't undo it.
Scary. Does SB 50 pay any attention to water limitations in the area?
No.
If a single-family neighborhood is governed by a homeowners association or CC&Rs that prohibit multi-family developments, does SB 50 nullify those?
To the best of my knowledge, it will.
How?
How?
I mean, I would ask your city attorney this, but I'm not at liberty to say why I say that.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. SB-50 gives power to developers, but does it ensure that housing actually gets built? SB-50's goal is to make housing more affordable, which means building enough that prices drop. But land development is privately financed. Will such investments chase a declining market?
So I'll take the first part of that. The issue that I have with SB-50 is it doesn't require a lot of densification. So if I want to come and buy a lot that's close to a train station and it has a floor area ratio of 2.5, I can build a big mansion and put a 375 square foot ADU, accessory dwelling unit, in the back and never rent it out. So I've now gone from a 14 or 1600 square foot house on a little lot of maybe 25 or 3,000 square feet with what I can do now just under the plain vanilla portion of SB-50. I can build mansions now. That's going to be one of the unintended consequences we see happening in San Francisco. Those are being sold as single family homes. The little unit never gets rented because when you walk in and pay $5 million cash for a house, you're not going to rent the 375 square foot thing to a pesky tenant, are you? No.
Susan, can you tell us a little bit about ACA1? This is in the CASA Compact number 10 for the housing enterprise, where it may reduce thresholds for voters to vote on money.
Well, I don't know about the thresholds, I guess. What I understand is that the creation of the Regional Housing Enterprise Authority is going to be modeled after MTC. There were a group of, I understand, somewhere 20 or 30 people who traveled back to New York as well, kind of to do an exploratory trip looking at what the New York housing enterprise, how that is set up. But the basic elements of it is that the governor would be making appointments for some of the members of that authority. MTC and ABAG might be making some of the appointments for who sits on that. There would be other kinds of ways in which people would be assembled to be serving on that housing authority. And they then would be having the right to set taxes and collect taxes and distribute that money through the 9-county Bay Area. We can expect, by the way CASA was set up, with the heavy participation of the big cities, Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco, that the chance for there to be something fairer and representation for local, smaller, and medium-sized cities is going to be troublesome. Oh, to 50.
Can you repeat his question, please? Can you stand up and say what you just said? I don't think everybody heard.
Yeah. The CASA Compact, by my reading, is calling to reduce the voter approval threshold to 55% for anything that is partly 2/3 requirement. And I think they picked that because most of them are failing because they've only got 56%. So that would clearly make it easier to push things.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
I
you,
think
sir.
that's true. That's right.
Can you also briefly speak to the property taxes that this CASA Compact element number 10 might do?
I did not bring the documents on that. So I would want to speak authoritatively about that if I was. But if you go to probably CASA Compact, if you Google that, you will find that information on the website. Or if you Google MTC, you will probably also get to CASA by way of that.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Cities permitted too many jobs to be added, causing home prices and rents to increase. How do we entice other cities to fix their imbalance?
So I'm for a regional approach to this solution. But I'm not sure CASA is the right vehicle to do it in. We can't all be balkanized and Cupertino adds a flying saucer to their office stock, and the residents have nowhere to live. No issue there, Mr. Mayor Scharf. But we need a regional solution. I think that's a good question. one of the things that we did in San Francisco by voter initiative that we probably won't be able to do anymore is we limited office growth, square footage each year. So, maybe we can do something like that. I think a state, that you got to have the homes before you add the jobs.
So I'll add something to that about Palo Alto. Palo Alto is a little bit of a victim of its own success. We're also excited about the advances in the tech industry and the jobs created that we forgot that the infrastructure had to grow along with it. And but we have done a lot in the last couple of years to incentivize housing through legislation and also through our municipal code. And we have done a lot for affordable housing by passing a new law, and workforce housing by passing a new law. We have a new deed-restricted affordable housing project coming up, and we also saved a very important affordable resource in the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. And we have two pretty strong limitations on commercial, an annual one and an absolute one on how much commercial growth we can have. We could do more, though.
Go ahead, Dennis.
So one of the things that, I worked for tech for 30 years, started here, which was one of the original tech companies, HP, for 16 years. One of the things that we're seeing, and when I go around the country to states that have talent but no jobs, they're saying, why do you have to keep putting all these jobs in these high-cost areas? Why this winner-take-all strategy? It's creating a lot of resentment around the rest of the country that we keep getting richer, and they're not really recovered yet from the 2008 recession. So there's no reason why we can't put a campus for Google in West Virginia. They've got great universities, they've got talented people, but nobody's talking about that. But the congressman down here, Ro Khanna, I think, was actually talking about that very thing, and I actually support that because I grew up, 20 miles from West Virginia, and I know what it's like. They have talented people, but they have no jobs.
So I just wanted to correct something. Is this on? Dennis said earlier. In Cupertino, the Apple spaceship was not built on an apricot orchard or a prune orchard. Prior to the spaceship was HP with 10,000 jobs. So I know it's been popular for Libby Schaaf and Sam Liccardo and London Breed to attack Cupertino. Oh my God, you added 13,000 jobs when you built the spaceship. Well, actually, no, we didn't. All those HP jobs left Cupertino, and most of the spaceship jobs moved from other buildings. If you really wanted to be accurate, the net number of jobs was probably actually a little less when you take all the jobs that left. So just whenever you hear, oh my God, Cupertino added 13,000 jobs, it's not quite accurate because that was not empty land before it was the spaceship. Thank you.
Good point, yeah. You got to change the narrative. I didn't understand that, so thanks for the correction.
So I'm getting notices, hand movements saying that our Q&A session is up. Now we're going to move into call to action, and I'll have Susan Kirsch come and give us the first.
Thank you. Those were some great questions. Thank you for the thoughtfulness that went into those. So, okay, I should have a slide, set 2, slide number 1. The first part of this is going to be just to give you a context of looking at what the action is, and it's going to be a calendar once we get it up there. So just to say a thank you to Maury, who's done a lot of the tech around this, and other people. There's a lot of people in this room who have been really helpful to make sure this whole day has unfolded as well as it has. Okay, so just looking at the issue of timing for taking action. The bills, all of these bills, the 200 bills plus what I guess there's another 1,000 or so that the legislators are considering, all of them are in their respective policy committees right now. And if you look, skipping the Livable California, I'll talk about that in just a minute, but if we go down to April 26th, all of the bills have to be out of their committees by April 26th, which means the bills will either be approved or defeated in the policy committee that enables them to move on to appropriations. So the April 26th, from now until April 26th, is a great time to be very, very active with phone calls and emails and letters and visits. So just to have that date especially in mind. And then obviously there is still time to be defeating or supporting bills beyond that, you know, where once the bills are out of committee, there's some other things that still happen. You know, they go from house, you know, from one house to the other. There's floor votes, so there's a lot of things that happen. But the intensity right now of shaping the opinion of especially your legislators around these bills, this next, you know, until April 26th is a really prime time to do that. And whoever had asked that question about, like, where are our assembly members, how are they responding to these bills, this next month will be the really important time to gauge that, and then see how they voted in the policy committees to know who is the most likely to be persuaded when the bills go into appropriations. So, you know, and then eventually, you know, there's the chance to also, you know, lobby the governor not to sign the bills, but that is somewhere way down the line. But I want to call out one other thing that Livable California is doing a week from Tuesday, March 26th. We are organizing a lobby day. And what that means is that we'll be going to Sacramento, and all of, you know, probably not all of you all can't do it, but there's sign-up sheets out out on the table. What we're looking is that someone would decide to be a driver and collect a team of 2 or 3 other people to go with them up to Sacramento. We will meet about 9:30 in Sacramento with our lobbyist, Rand Martin, who will make sure there's an orientation to who we're going to be talking to, and we will prepare talking notes and a schedule. We still haven't decided if you'll go out on teams geographically, or it's more likely we will look to mix up teams so that we would have somebody from Palo Alto and Marin, and somebody from Southern California and San Diego, that we get that richness of going into a legislator's office, having the key person who is from that district take the introductions, but then have that message of saying throughout the state, people are opposed to Senate Bill 50 will be our focus on this day. So, so if any of you are interested in that, the sign-up sheet is out there. We would have maybe 2 or 3 15 to 20-minute meetings with an aide or an actual senator or representative in the morning. We would convene around lunch and trade notes, and then maybe 1 or 2 visits in the afternoon, most likely with people heading back home by, say, 3 o'clock or so. So one of those actions that you're all invited to join. Okay, so I think let's go on to the next slide. This gives you that kind of big picture of what the map is. So we've got several items that we want to encourage you to do. We're going to go through 7 of them one at a time. So the first one, as someone said earlier, the most important thing you can do is to call your own representative. For me and Marin, it's Mike McGuire and Mark Levine. You know what? We've had some other names of who it is to call or email or go in to visit face-to-face with those people and let them know. And if you can go in with a team, it's even better if you go in to have the meeting. Oh, wait, that didn't come up for number 1. There we go. Call or email your representative. Okay, number 2, and you have this information on a sheet that you came in, that you picked up, or is on your seat, the one that's called Act Now. Number 2 is to call or email the Senate Housing Committee, the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. Those 2 committees are going to be hearing both Senate Bill 50 and Senate Bill 4, which we've not said anything about, but just briefly, that's Mike McGuire's bill, which is similar to Scott Wiener's. We think it is not quite as dreadful because at least it's not based on bus stops, but it's another one to be watching and monitoring a bit. So that's why Governance and Finance is on this list. Assembly Housing Committee is another one on this list because that's where the Regional Housing Authority bill will be heard. And then the Appropriations Committee, the recommendation is that because most of these bills will end up being approved, most likely, out of their committee and go to appropriations. But in appropriations, if we can start building that awareness among our elected representatives that people are not happy with those bills, we can maybe make a difference there. Number 3, one of the most important things you can do is to send letters on your own personal or professional letterhead, but to show up individually. And second, if you're part of a neighborhood association or a community group or the Sierra Club or some established entity, to write your letter on letterhead, be clear that you've got the subject line that says, regarding Senate Bill 50, and to be stating clearly opposed, assuming you will be opposing it. You may add additional paragraphs of why you oppose it, and some of that information is on this sheet as well. But a lot of what happens, unless you're going to get really deep into suggesting amendments, is that these letters will be tallied for who's opposed and who's in favor of the bill. So when you either make the calls or send the letters, you can be very brief. So don't stress over it. Just write it and convey your opinion about it. Okay, next one is to join us on the March 26th Lobby Day. Really, it's like in so many things, the personal contact is one of the things that will be most influential in whatever we try to do. So this is a good time to develop a relationship with your representative or any of these committee members. Number 5, is that you write letters, to the newspaper, write editorials, post what you write to next door, talk to people in the grocery store or at the park or wherever you are congregating, and there's a minute to say, hey, do you know about Senate Bill 50? I was at a meeting. There are some dreadful things happening, so talk about it. Number 6, the idea of hosting a small gathering, a neighborhood coffee, or hosting another town hall meeting for those of you who are here from other cities. Do a similar kind of event in your own community. You've got a great template here for what's happened in Palo Alto. But also to know living room gatherings with any of this material, to hand it out, to go to the websites, is another good way to build the awareness of what we're facing. And then 7, just if you do need more information, we're working really hard to try to make sure we keep our website up to date and current with the bills and the talking points, and so we're doing the best we can. As any of you know who have ever done websites, it's not always easy to keep them up to date, but we are working really as much as we can on that. So should I take any questions? Well, I'll be around afterwards if there's questions about that. Let's leave it at that, except for, we'll take one. Danessa.
Question. There's an article out on the front table of what every California resident needs to understand about the CASA compact and the proposed housing bills. Pick it up on your way out, and you have my permission to copy it and send it to your friends. Get it out there.
This is a great example of Livable California wanting everybody to work smarter, not just harder. And if you do something, and if you're willing to share it, please, get it out there. And if you do have things that you want to send to Livable California, we'll have a little review, but we'll post a lot of those things as well. So should I do my final part of the close?
Yes.
Okay. So last slide, then, is the importance to act. That we don't surrender our community and our quality of life to politicians, real estate, and financial investors. The importance of protecting local values through statewide actions. So I'm going to ask you, 4 questions around this idea the future is in our hands. So 1, if you saw anything on this list of the call to action, one thing that you can do once or more than one thing, if you see something that you can do, would you raise your hand? Okay, that is fantastic. Second question. Just take a moment to look at your hands and your capacity in your hands to write or call or greet or talk to people. Take that look at the future is in our hands. And to know that can be a kind of lonely thing, but if you're willing, would you just reach out and take the hand of the person next to you? Take the hand of the person next to you. If you raise your hands up, would we just take a look at the power that exists for any and all of us working together in this way of being unified. And the final thing in a hand is to say there is so much effort that everybody is putting into this. So would you please give yourself and everyone else a hand for the work that's going into this?
Before we end, Dennis Richards also has some parting words for everybody.
Just one thing I wanted to say. You folks did a great job on the kind of impact analysis visually, but you got to remember, this is not when this is just for the plain vanilla SB-50. If they take the density bonus on top of it, they could add 3 more stories. So I want to make sure that you realize this is, just plain vanilla stuff. We had an analysis in San Francisco, and here's your plain vanilla version. I know it's probably hard to see. When you add the density bonus on top, this is what it looks like. And then if the developer chooses that he doesn't want to build higher, he wants to go into the backyard, here's a full lot line building. It could actually erase all of our backyards if everybody chooses this option. The developer actually gets to choose their own planning code. So all the things like height, density, setbacks, lot mergers, use size, parking, massing, exposure requirements, rear yard requirements, floor area ratio, demolition controls, out the window. They get to choose 3 exemptions to those, and that becomes code complying. You can't challenge it. That's how the law's read. That's how the law's written. It's code complying. You have no discretion. I just want everybody to be clear on that.
So I have a lot of announcements also, but I just wanted to make sure Livable California has a call to action, which Susan have just told you about. But the Palo Altans for Sensible Zoning also has a call to action, and it was together in your package on your chair when you came in, and it says you need to act now, and it has the names and the phone numbers as well as the emails for your representatives at the higher offices to let them know that your thoughts about SB-50 as well as other bills that are listed by Susan in her brochure. There's quite a number of them that is going to change the character of our neighborhoods and of our city. Somebody asked, can we get the slides to share on our network? That will be on the Palo Altans for Sensible Zoning website, and it is www.sensiblezoning.org. I have another one here that is on Saturday, April 6th at 9:45 a.m. There is going to be another event that is called Pros and Cons of CASA, Compact, and Related Bills. It is hosted by the League of Women Voters, Southwest Santa Clara Valley and Bay Area chapter. There will be multiple speakers from MTC, City Council members, and nonprofits. It's going to be at the Campbell Community Center. And then lastly, as we've said before, it's going to take a lot of money in order to help get the message out. So please stop by the tables up front and make a donation. This event was also put together by Palo Altans for Sensible Zoning, and the organization could use donations as well if you want to see more of these educational events. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of you being here and for participating. And I see a hand. Yes, ma'am.
Who sponsored this event?
Palo Alto Neighborhoods, PAN, as well as Mid-Penn Peninsula, Mid-Penn Media.
Are there anybody from the other side of the say that CASA is there anybody there representing?
I think that you had an event also a couple days ago on the other side, and you put it out to the public, so it was also there.
Dan was not sponsoring it. It wasn't.
I don't think that's a debate. They were kind enough to step up to do this, and so they're the sponsors. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I think. The video will be available on the Palo Altans for Sensible Zoning website.